I woke up to a suffocating sense of emptiness, tangible and real. My hand, instinctively reaching for her body, met only the cold sheets. Emma was gone. At first, I thought it was a dream, some trick of the mind, but her absence was too real. I got up, my steps echoing in the silence of the room. The clock showed 2 a.m. In the dim light, everything seemed ordinary, yet at the same time, as if something fundamental had shifted. I walked to the window and quietly pulled the curtain aside, peering into the darkness. The silver glow of the moon spread across the beach, illuminating its emptiness. I stared for a long time, expecting to see her silhouette among the palms, on the sand, near the water. But there was nothing. Silence. It was as if the world had frozen, leaving me alone with this strange, unsettling feeling. Thoughts I had tried to suppress for weeks began to surface. I recalled her fleeting glances away when I caught her eyes, only for her to quickly look elsewhere. The suspicious phone calls with a friend, which always ended abruptly when I entered the room. I had tried to ignore these little signs, convincing myself they were just my fears, that I was overthinking. Emma and I had been together for years, and I couldn't imagine her hiding something from me, but tonight, left alone, all the doubts, all the anxieties suddenly clawed their way to the surface. I couldn't push them aside anymore, couldn't keep pretending I was at peace. I moved toward the door, pulling on my shirt as I went, and quietly opened it. The darkness of the night enveloped me as I stepped onto the balcony. The cool air stung my skin, but it did nothing to dispel the suffocating unease. I lit a cigarette, hoping to focus on something, anything to distract myself. The flame of the lighter briefly illuminated my face, and I noticed how my hands trembled. That wasn't like me. I looked toward the beach again. Where there were usually crowds of people, now there was no one. Only the sound of the waves and the gentle rustle of palm leaves in the breeze. It felt as if life carried on around me, but I was left outside of it, in a void. She'll come back, I whispered to myself. Just wait. But when her image resurfaced in my mind, her eyes, her smile, the way she touched her hair, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something, that there was something I hadn't seen, something right in front of me. I knew something was wrong. But what? I released the last puff of cigarette smoke, feeling its scent drift into the dark air, dissolving into the night. The ash, falling into the ashtray, left a trace, like a flame extinguished too soon. But the fire burning inside me did not die out. Emma, her face emerged in my mind again, like a shadow that could not be chased away. Her words, her silences, her gaze, all of it swirled around me, pressing on my chest, making me feel like a stranger in my own world. I felt her slipping away from me, as if I couldn't hold on to her, as if everything was dissolving into uncertainty. I needed to get out, to stop, to breathe. I couldn't stay here any longer, in this space where every corner was filled with her absence. Maybe, if I just walked a little, if I went outside, I could forget for a moment what was happening between us. Maybe the night would bring a sliver of clarity. I made my way to the door, ready to leave. Opening it, I felt the humid night air wrapping around me. It was familiar, as though the earth itself was trying to comfort me. I took a deep breath, feeling it fill my lungs. Everything was quiet, as if the world knew I was on the brink of something, some pivotal thought about to surface. I reached for my shirt and, without hesitation, headed down the stairs. I didn't know where I was going, but my steps led me toward the beach. I hadn't thought much about what I would find, but for some reason, my feet couldn't help but take me there. At this hour, the beach was empty, like so much else in this life. I knew I wouldn't see anyone here but myself. Just an ordinary beach in a tourist town, bustling with crowds in the morning but swallowed by darkness at night. And now, not a single person, not a single sound except the dull crash of waves rolling in and pulling back. Each step into the empty night felt like a step into nothingness, and though I was alone, loneliness wrapped itself around me with every new stride. Then, suddenly, in the midst of the silence, I noticed footprints in the sand. I stopped, holding my breath, as if not disturbing this moment might turn it into a bad dream I could wake from. The prints were clear, narrow ones from women's sandals, and beside them, larger ones from a man, as if someone had been here recently, as if this night wasn't as empty as it seemed, but hid some other reality. I bent down, studying the footprints closely. They stretched along the shoreline, as though guiding me toward a place I didn't want to go. These imprints, like markers, led me straight to a wooden pier that lay hidden in the shadows of the palm trees. It felt distant and unfamiliar, like a place unmentioned in tourist guides. A spot left unlit, concealed in the night's haze. I stepped toward it without thinking. Each new step, each imprint in the sand, made my heart beat faster, as though I were approaching something forbidden, something long hidden from my eyes. Why had she come here, alone, at night? Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't I know where she went, when she left, and with whom? I felt the darkness, the night itself, pulling me toward the pier. As if I were following an invisible call, standing at a crossroads where no direction felt safe. My thoughts became tangled, and anxiety overwhelmed me. We had come here, to this island, to this secluded place, and I thought we had finally found our haven, our peace and quiet. We had cut ourselves off from the noisy, chaotic world to be together and forget everything. But now, amidst these footprints in the sand, I felt as though everything was collapsing, as if she was slipping away from me, and I couldn't hold on to her. Each step toward the pier grew heavier, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it, like an echo in an empty room. What was waiting there, in the darkness? I kept following the footprints as though some invisible force was pulling me forward, compelling me to step into that dark corner I had been trying to avoid for the past week. The sand crunched under my feet, and each step left a mark behind, a symbol of the fact that I couldn't turn back. The cold wind lashed against my face, cutting to the bone, but I didn't feel it. I was too focused on what awaited me. And yet, deep down, every part of me screamed that I needed to stop, that I shouldn't go any further. But I couldn't. Step by step, I moved toward the pier, as if some invisible magnet was drawing me to where the truth, which I had so desperately avoided, already waited for me. With every meter, my inner world crumbled. I knew I shouldn't see this, that I wasn't ready for what might reveal itself before me, but at the same time, there was the sense that I had no right not to know what lay behind this waking nightmare. My thoughts grew more jumbled as I tried to focus, but I couldn't. My body moved automatically, as though someone else was in control. When I finally reached the pier, my heart clenched so tightly that I nearly collapsed. Everything I had feared, everything I had tried to escape, stood plainly before me. The moonlight shimmered on the water surface, and at the end of the pier, barely illuminated, stood Emma and an unfamiliar man. His silhouette was blurry, but I could clearly see how close they were to each other. She stood beside him, her body slightly leaning toward him, and I froze, unable to move. She turned to him, and I saw her face. In that moment, all the pain and doubt came crashing down on me because her face lit up with the same smile she used to give only to me. It was a smile I knew by heart, but now it wasn't meant for me. I recognized it instantly, as if it had been hiding from me all this time, lurking in the shadows. The man leaned toward her, and she didn't pull away. In that moment, the entire world seemed to stop. I felt the space between us collapse to nothing, as if it no longer existed. Everything I had ever known vanished. She didn't take a single step back, didn't stop him, didn't even glance in my direction. I saw his lips meet hers in a kiss, and it felt as though something inside me shattered. I couldn't look away, but my eyes refused to close. They were fixed on them, unable to turn away, even as each moment felt like a punch to the stomach. My heart pounded so violently that I could feel it shaking my chest. I didn't understand what was happening to me, but I couldn't escape this moment. My mind felt empty, save for one question: why? Why was this happening? Why was I here, paralyzed by this fear and pain? Time seemed to freeze, and I stood there in this dead end, this nightmare more real than any of my fears. Everything I had known, everything I had loved, was vanishing, and I couldn't grasp what to do with this feeling, that my heart, my mind, my life, everything was falling apart in this single instant. I continued to stand there in the darkness, unable to tear my gaze away from their figures. The moonlight illuminated the pier, but it wasn't enough to conceal their closeness. The man was slightly taller than her, with dark hair that the wind tousled. He held her by the waist, their bodies far too close. Emma didn't pull away, didn't resist. I noticed how her face seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, her eyes closed as he leaned toward her. I knew that look had once been meant only for me, and now I saw it on someone else. The man gently placed his hands on her back, and she didn't move away. They were so close that I could see the slight rise and fall of her shoulders as they tensed when their lips met. It was a long kiss, as though they were melting into each other. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. In my head, there was only one word: why? When they broke the kiss, I saw her face relax into a soft expression of peace. He looked at her the way I once did, with admiration, with tenderness. I couldn't understand what was happening. It was as if I had stepped into another world, one where everything I had known and thought was mine was now someone else's. He embraced her, and she didn't pull away. In that moment, I knew I couldn't stay. I turned and, without looking back, walked away. Each step was a struggle, as if something was pulling me back into the emptiness I had just felt. My mind swirled with countless questions, but there were no answers. A sense of hollowness consumed me, and I no longer knew what to do with myself. When I returned to the room, it was 3:27 a.m. The light in the room was dim, and I barely noticed when she quietly opened the door. Emma entered, her figure barely visible in the half-light. I sat in a chair, staring into the void, trying to rid myself of the image that still lingered in my mind, as if reality itself wouldn't let me go. I waited, unsure of what I would say. I continued sitting, feeling time stretch unbearably. My thoughts spun in a vicious circle, offering no respite. I tried to find an explanation that might calm me, but everything that came to mind made no sense. With every breath, I sank deeper into the memory of seeing her and him. Why had she gone there? Why now? The creak of the door and Emma's quiet footsteps pulled me back to the present. She wasn't the same person I was used to seeing. Her face was pale, her hair disheveled, and her eyes, they seemed as though she was trying to hide something that was already too obvious. I didn't say anything at first. I just sat there, staring into the dark corners of the room, where the same emptiness pulsed as in my soul. Where were you? My voice was barely more than a whisper, but the tension in it was unmistakable. Emma froze, and a flicker of panic crossed her face. It was like the moment when someone realizes they've been caught but scrambles for an excuse. I was just walking, she said, her tone strained, each word echoing in my head. I looked up at her, my eyes burning with the same fire as before, though now it was mixed with despair. I knew she was lying, and the feeling was like a blow to the head. Don't lie to me, Emma, my voice hardened, unable to mask my frustration. I saw everything, on the pier, with him. She stepped back as if trying to distance herself from her own words. Fear flickered in her eyes, but she couldn't hide what was already obvious. You were following me. Her voice turned sharp, but I didn't look away. I wasn't following you, I replied through clenched teeth. I just went to the beach, and there, I saw you. With him, Emma, you kissed him. Silence hung heavy between as she lowered her gaze, her hands nervously tugging at the hem of her shirt, as if that could calm her. I waited, but I didn't know what to expect from her. You don't understand, she finally said. It's not what you think. I stood abruptly and took a step toward her, anger boiling over. Then explain it to me, Emma. How could you do this? You didn't even tell me you didn't want to be with me anymore. I was here, trying to make this work, and you just walked away. She clenched her fists, pain visible on her face. I didn't walk away, Jake. I was trying to figure things out. Lately, between us, there hasn't been anything real. And I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared. I took a step back, unable to process her words. Scared? I asked, my voice trembling with despair. You couldn't just talk to me. You decided to find someone else instead, to distract yourself. Emma raised her eyes, and I saw a mix of pain and regret in them. She stepped closer to me, but I didn't allow myself to move toward her. I didn't want to hurt you, Jake, but I couldn't keep living like this. I felt like we were losing each other, becoming strangers. He was there when I needed someone. A wave of pain washed over me. All those weeks when I had tried to ignore that something was wrong now crashed down on me. Everything I had tried to suppress was suddenly undeniable. You promised things would be different, my voice cracked. You promised we'd work on this, that we'd stay together. Emma slowly stepped closer, her face full of remorse. I can't do this anymore, Jake. I can't keep living in this lie, in this silence. I tried to fight, but now I know I need to be honest, with myself and with you. I closed my eyes, unable to listen any longer. It was too much, too painful, but maybe now I finally knew what I had to do. Emma stood before me, her body tense, as if every nerve in her was on edge. She kept fiddling with the strap of her bag, as though seeking some sort of comfort in the familiar motion, but it did nothing to help. The silence in the room grew heavy, almost tangible. We both remained quiet, and despite everything that had been said, each of us continued to hide something from the other. I didn't know what would happen next. It had been so long since we'd spoken so openly, and now that we finally had, the words felt bitter and unbearable. Anger and despair churned inside me, the injustice of it all overwhelming. You're tired, I echoed her words, trying to keep my voice steady, but it cracked, growing hoarse and angrier. That's your explanation, you're just tired of us. Emma turned away again, avoiding my gaze. I saw her eyes glisten, though she refused to let herself cry. Instead, she took a step back, as if trying to find some kind of safety, some kind of excuse in that movement. You don't understand, Jake, she said softly, her voice quiet but firm, carrying a detached sadness that made me feel like a stranger to her. It's not that simple. I tried, but you never noticed how hard I was working to be the person you wanted me to be, not myself. You didn't listen when I said I was struggling. You never saw how much I was changing. That was the moment I wanted to grab her by the shoulders, to make her understand that I had been a part of this too. But instead of doing that, I felt my anger boil over, leaving me restless. Are you serious? I nearly shouted. You're blaming me for not seeing how much you were suffering. Did you ever think about how I was going through hell too, trying to hold us together, trying to save this marriage? You say I didn't notice you. Did you ever notice me? When I woke up at night and saw you lost in your thoughts, unable to say a single word to help me understand what was happening to us. My face contorted with anger as I stepped forward, but Emma didn't retreat. She stood there, as though against an invisible barrier, unable to continue the conversation. The silence hung heavy between us, and I suddenly realized that her words weren't just accusing me, they were her attempt to justify herself. So that's it, huh? I continued, my tone sharper, more aggressive. You just can't keep pretending anymore. You can't be with me because you're tired of us, tired of trying to fix what we have, and you'd rather be with him. Emma slowly lifted her eyes, and I saw pain flicker in them. But there was something else too, something like despair, and I realized she didn't know how to answer me. She stood there, as if searching for some justification in her words, but I knew there was nothing she could say to make things right again. You don't understand, Jake. Her voice was almost a whisper now, as if she was afraid of her own admission. I don't love him. I'm not trying to replace you. But when we were losing each other, when I saw you consumed by your work and your problems, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I couldn't just sit here and watch everything fall apart, powerless to change if it was my only escape. Her words hit me like a heavy blow, and I felt everything inside me crumble. Escape, what she called an escape, I saw as betrayal. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't understand what she meant when she spoke of salvation. Was it her way of survival, or just a way to run away? Escape, you went to him on the night I needed you most. You didn't even think about me. I stepped closer, unable to hold back my emotions. And now you're telling me it was salvation. You betrayed me, Emma. She quickly turned away, her shoulders trembling. I saw her hands shaking, but she didn't respond. I expected some kind of defense, some word that could ground me again, but her silence only confirmed what I feared was true. You see what you've done, don't you? I continued, my voice heavy with anger. You destroyed everything we had, and now you're looking for excuses. You knew it wasn't just a walk. You knew I'd see you, and you still went to him. Emma clenched her jaw, her hands trembling more visibly now. She sat down on the edge of the table, fiddling with her bag, unable to meet my gaze. I could see she was trying to gather her thoughts, but her eyes were empty. She wasn't searching for excuses anymore, she was simply silent, and that was worse than anything she could have said. You just don't understand, Jake, her whisper was barely audible. I tried to save us, but I can't carry this weight anymore. Emma's words felt like a dagger to the heart. I stood there, frozen, unable to move. The pain was too overwhelming, and the emptiness inside me, too deep. I felt the world around me collapse, but I couldn't find the words to stop her, to take us back to a moment when we could still be happy. So this is how it ends? I asked, my voice cracking. I'm just supposed to accept it. We've been living as if everything's fine, and now you're saying you can't anymore. Emma closed her eyes, and I saw her shoulders tremble with heavy breaths. She didn't answer. All she could do was stay silent. I can't do this anymore, Jake, she finally whispered. And maybe, I don't even know who I am anymore. It was a confession and a farewell all at once. I stood there, unable to process it. My heart continued to break, but the words died on my tongue. All that remained was silence, filling the space between us like a chasm that could never be bridged. The next day, I decided I had to find out who he was. The town was small, and from what I'd gathered, everyone knew each other. After a brief conversation with the hotel staff, I managed to get the information I needed. His name was Alex. He worked as a photographer, specializing in capturing the local landscapes. Not exactly the kind of person you'd expect to become entangled in our lives. Yet his face had appeared in my memory. He'd been sitting at the bar a few days ago, chatting with the bartender while I sipped my coffee. I hadn't paid him any attention then, but now, as images of him swirled in my mind, it all seemed far more significant. I found him at a cafe by the beach, where he often photographed sunsets and sunrises, or so I'd been told. He was sitting at a table, deeply focused on the photos displayed on his camera. His attention was entirely absorbed, and he didn't notice me at first. But as I stepped closer, his eyes lifted, and I realized he was ready for this meeting. He looked as though he'd anticipated this moment and was prepared for the conversation's inevitable tension. "You're Jake, aren't you?" he asked with a faint smile, his face showing neither regret nor fear. He was calm, self-assured, like someone who had long understood this confrontation was bound to happen. I wasted no time. "I want to know what connects you to my wife," I said directly, locking eyes with him. His gaze didn't falter. He didn't flinch or even show the slightest discomfort. He knew this was the question I would ask eventually. "Emma's unhappy," he said evenly, with a calmness that felt almost unnerving. "We just found each other at a difficult time." The word unhappy sent a wave of pain through me. I felt anger rising, my chest tightening as if the air had suddenly thickened. This wasn't just a thought anymore, it was confirmation of my worst fears. found each other, I couldn't keep the anger from my voice. Do you even realize what you've done? Alex exhaled, his face remaining composed. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could utter a word, a familiar voice cut through the tension, pulling me back into a flood of emotions and doubts. Jake, stop. I turned around. Emma was standing at the entrance of the cafe, her eyes filled with guilt and apprehension. She didn't move, as though paralyzed by the weight of the moment. I noticed how her gaze shifted between me and Alex before settling on me again. I felt the pressure in my chest intensify, and the air seemed harder to breathe. All I wanted was to understand what had happened and why she, standing before me now, hadn't been able to tell me the truth earlier. We need to talk, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. This wasn't a request, it was a statement. She knew I wouldn't stop until I got answers, and she couldn't remain silent any longer. Alex, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stepped aside, giving us space. His calm demeanor was unsettling, as if he'd already accepted everything that was happening and knew no words could change the reality we faced. I didn't know what to do. I stood there, unable to form a single sentence. Emma looked at me, searching my eyes for understanding, as though hoping for something that might ease the burden she carried. We can't keep going like this, she began, her voice tense but measured, with a weight that hinted at something unavoidable. I know you're angry, that you probably hate me, but I can't keep hiding this from you. Her words caught me off guard. I'd braced myself for any scenario, but she had started a conversation that defied all my expectations. I struggled to make sense of what she was saying, but the chaos in my mind drowned out any clarity. My thoughts were swirling, and yet, she didn't look away. I know you saw me with him, she continued, her voice growing softer, as though each word pained her to say aloud. I can't justify it, but you weren't there, Jake. You were so far from me that I lost everything I had left. I tried to find a way out, to find myself. I remained silent. All I could do was listen. The pain coursed through me, but I couldn't lash out in anger. Despite everything she was saying, I still loved her. Yet her words felt like a poison I couldn't fully swallow. I don't know what happens next, she whispered, her words uncertain and vague. But I need you to know that this hasn't been easy for me either. I said nothing in return. We left the cafe in silence, and even when she lay down beside me in the hotel room, the quiet between us was impenetrable. We both knew that moment was only the beginning of what was to come. Neither of us could sleep, because even though we were together, an unbridgeable void loomed between us, a void that words or promises could never fill. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I knew I had to learn more about Alex. A fire burned within me, and I couldn't extinguish it until I uncovered the whole truth. I got up, dressed, and left the room without a word, determined to find answers no matter the cost. We sat at a table by the window. The evening light faintly painted the sea in crimson hues, as if warning us of the end of something important. The room was quiet, only the sound of waves and a soft breeze coming through the open doors broke the silence. I felt time stretching, as though Emma and I had been sitting there not for minutes but hours. Each moment of silence was another sting in my heart. She wasn't truly here with me, even though she sat right across the table. We were so close, yet so far apart. I can't keep pretending anymore, Emma said, her voice soft but resolute. She lowered her gaze, staring at her hands as though searching for answers there. It's been over between us for a long time. I wanted to leave, but I was afraid of hurting you. I froze. Her words hit me harder than any physical blow. How long had it been over? How could she say that? My heart was still beating, but now there was no room left for hope. Leave, I asked, barely keeping my voice steady. It threatened to break. You decided to just find someone else instead of talking to me. Emma looked as though her own words had left a deeper emptiness in her soul than they had in mine. She didn't reply immediately, only clenched her hands tighter on her lap. I could feel her struggling to find the right words, but I couldn't understand why it was taking her so long to say them. Jake, I tried, so many times, but you wouldn't listen. You didn't notice, she said, her eyes clouding as she dropped her gaze again. I tried to reach you. I screamed inside, but you kept leaving for your work, your world. I couldn't take it anymore. Her words were a blow I wasn't prepared for. I tried to keep control of myself, but what she was saying tore me apart. My mind was spinning, refusing to accept the reality she was presenting. I tried to recall how many times we had sat in this very spot, talking, laughing, yet now she was telling me it had all been lost. Everything. I didn't notice. I repeated, disbelief in my voice. You're saying I was blind. I was there. I was always there. Did you ever try to understand why I was working so much, why I acted the way I did? I thought I was showing you I loved you. I thought that was how we could be happy. Emma raised her head, her eyes filled with regret. For the first time, I saw how tired she was, of us, of this, of me. You thought you loved me, she said quietly. But you didn't. You only loved yourself. You loved your work, your plans, your world. In me, I was just there, and you didn't even see me. I wanted you to notice me, to see that I wasn't just living for your ambitions. Her words were knives cutting through me, leaving me gasping for air. I felt myself shrinking inside, as though the entire world had narrowed to those sentences. But what could I say? I didn't know. I still didn't know what to say. You're saying I didn't listen. I started, but I realized immediately it was just another excuse, another way to shield myself from the truth. I tried. I thought if I did everything I was supposed to, if I worked hard, it would all work out. We'd be happy. She looked at me, and her eyes suddenly seemed empty, as if she no longer believed anything I was saying. You thought working hard would make me happy. But I didn't want that, Jake. I didn't need you to buy me gifts or spend money to prove your love. I needed your time. I needed your attention. I couldn't stay with someone who lived in another world, while I was just the background. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I felt suffocated. I tried to understand how she felt, but I couldn't. All I knew was that I had failed to be the person she needed. You're saying you couldn't stay silent, but why were you silent for so long? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you come to me and say you were unhappy? I didn't know why, but I wanted her answer, even though I knew it wouldn't change anything. She sighed and looked down again. Her voice grew quieter, as if even speaking was exhausting. I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd see that something was wrong. I thought if I stayed silent, you'd notice on your own. But you didn't. I tried to stay close, but you wouldn't hear me. You didn't understand. I said nothing. I didn't know what to say. All I could do was sit there and look at her tired eyes, her trembling hands. She wasn't the woman I used to know anymore. And I wasn't the man she had once fallen in love with. I should have spoken up. Jake, she continued, her voice calm now, but her words cutting deeper than ever. I should have told you I couldn't live like this anymore. I should have told you I couldn't stay a part of your life if you didn't see me, but it's too late now. I fought against the feeling that I was losing her completely. My mind was blank, but my heart kept pounding in desperation. You're saying it's too late. I said, swallowing hard. But you're here. We're sitting here together. Maybe it's not all lost. Emma looked at me, and in her gaze, I felt the last shred of hope leaving me, disappearing entirely. It's all lost, Jake, she said. Everything. The evening after our conversation seemed endless. Time dragged on, and I sat by the window, watching as darkness descended. Outside the glass, twilight silently fell, and the silence in the room felt heavy. Emma was packing her things. Each of her movements was slow and deliberate, as if she still couldn't believe she was doing this. I sat and watched, not knowing what to say. My heart ached, but the words stuck in my throat. All I could do was silently watch as she packed her things. In her hands, her favorite belongings flickered. scarf I bought her for last year's anniversary, the book she loved so much, and the shoes I knew she had never worn, even though they had been sitting in the corner. There were no goodbyes, no tears. She quietly headed for the door, and I, without moving, silently watched her leave. Every step she took echoed heavily in my chest, and it seemed that with each step, she was pulling further away from me, forever. When the door closed, I was left alone. Silence filled the space, and I felt it pressing down on me. Everything around me continued to move, but it felt as though time had stopped. The sea outside still roared, but now I couldn't hear it. I only felt the emptiness inside me, stretching and swallowing me whole. It wasn't just loneliness. It was the end of everything I had known. I stood up, not knowing what to do next. I walked to the window, trying to push away the thoughts, but they wouldn't let me go. My hands clenched into fists, and her words kept spinning in my mind. She was gone, and in that moment, I realized that nothing could be fixed. Everything we had built together had been nothing but an illusion. I wasn't ready to let her go, but now there was no turning back. I understood that a new chapter of my life was beginning, cruel, painful, but honest.